Vara's breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale a jagged knife slicing through the frigid morning air. Her legs trembled beneath her, the ground uneven and cruel as she stumbled through the dense underbrush, the world around her a swirl of grim shadows and damp earth. She forced her gaze ahead, amber eyes burning with desperation as the bitter truth clawed at her throat. The clan she had called family, the only home she had ever known, had branded her a traitor. Accused of a crime so vile, so utterly alien to her nature, they had thrown her out, cast her into the wilderness, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart shattered beyond repair. The scar along her right cheek throbbed faintly, a whisper of a past confrontation as her thoughts spiraled. They believed the lies, all of them. Their faces, once warm with camaraderie and shared purpose, now twisted in cold disdain, replayed in her mind like a cruel mockery. "You are the poison," they had said, their voices sharp and final. I never betrayed them. I never. A sudden snap of a brittle twig underfoot shattered her fragile concentration, and panic surged like wildfire. She pressed herself against a towering oak, chest heaving, eyes wild and searching. The forest was no friend, but somehow it was sanctuary. Better the biting chill and gnashing roots than the ruthless judgment of those who once called her sister. Every step was agony, muscles burning, but she forced herself onwards until something unfamiliar stirred in the distance, a jagged stone wall, dark and towering against a sky swollen with thunderclouds. Vara's heart hammered with weary hope. Beyond these walls lay the realm of Kylric, the Alpha King, a man as feared as he was isolated. Tales told he was cursed, barred from touch, haunted by an inner beast that no man could tame. No one ventured beyond his domain willingly, for his shadow stretched long and merciless. Yet it was here she would find shelter or death, and death stirred little fear in her bones any more. As she neared the fortress's edge, the cold stones glistened slick with rain, the air thick with the scent of pine and moss. A low growl rumbled beneath the earth, subtle yet unmistakable, echoing inside her chest like thunder. She froze, amber eyes scanning the darkness, catching the gleam of ice blue staring back from the shadows. Kylric, not fully man, yet not beast. A restless fury contained behind a mask of iron will. He stepped forward, each movement a silent command over the night air. His ripped silhouette seemed carved from shadow and stone, but his eyes, fierce and penetrating, locked onto her with a hunger she dared not understand. No words passed between them, only the unspoken tension of two broken souls hovering on the cusp of collision. "You should not be here." His voice was low, gravelly with restraint. Vara swallowed hard. "I have nowhere else to go." The Alpha's gaze flickered toward her faint scar, an eyebrow lifting imperceptibly. Weak, yet alive, his breath misted in the cold air. Pain flared across her ribcage, sharp and honest. "I am no threat." Kylric's intense stare never wavered. At that moment, despite the barrier of centuries-old curses and raw loneliness, something primal whispered between them. His beast, a shadow beneath his skin, growled, not with wrath, but with a strange yearning, an unspoken plea for connection, for difference in the unyielding desolation of his existence. The hint of a smile, brief, almost cruel, curved Kylric's lips. "Then live, for now under watch." She blinked in surprise, the bitter chill momentarily forgotten. "You will not kill me." Not yet. And so, under the heavy weight of his guarded acceptance, Vara crossed the threshold into his fortress. The doors closed behind her with a finality that echoed in her soul. The walls around her were not just stone, but barriers of hope and despair intertwined. She was a shadow in Ceolric's kingdom, a fragile secret beneath a storm-weathered king's unyielding gaze. Days passed in muted silence, the castle a labyrinth of echoing halls and cold stone corridors. Every glance Ceolric cast her way was sharp-edged and unrelenting, a silent reminder that she was neither trusted nor welcomed. She moved quietly through the fortress, her amber eyes scanning for some sign of warmth amidst the biting chill of his domain. Yet the king remained a fortress unto himself, rigid and frosty, his lips pressed hard in a line that refused to soften. Vara understood the curse that weighed on him like chains forged in darkness. Every touch forbidden, every moment of closeness, a torment. She felt the beast lurking beneath his skin, a restless storm barely contained, as if the walls between man and monster were both prison. One storm-racked night, the thunder rolling over stone roofs like distant war drums, Vara found herself on the other side of Ceolric's imposing door. Lightning flashed, illuminating the castle's austere corridors in stark splashes of white and grey. She held a small bowl of water and a thick slice of smoked meat wrapped in cloth, placing them gently just outside his chamber. It was a simple act, a quiet offering born, not of hope for gratitude, but of a fragile thread of kindness she refused to sever. The storm's howl masked the soft footsteps she tried to quiet, the slow breath of a gesture that in such a place seemed painfully small, but infinitely brave. She turned away, heart beating louder than the thunder, convinced no one had noticed. The court had eyes everywhere, but no one had seen the water left at a king's door without demand or command. Yet somewhere deep inside Ceolric, behind the scowl and the curse, the gesture ignited a flare of something long dead. His beast stirred violently, the restless growls shaking loose from the depths of his soul, echoing in the hollow spaces where tenderness had not been welcomed for too long. Ceolric lingered unseen in the shadows beyond the door, his gaze locked on the simple bowl. He fought the urge to reach for her, to break the ancient curse that bound him from human touch, his own fingers trembling with a longing he dared not voice. The silence between them cracked, fragile and pulsing, as if the cold fortress might thaw just enough to let something new take hold. Asterisk. Why does her presence unsettle me so? Asterisk. Why does her presence unsettle me so? Each night, Vara's quiet defiance of his isolation stirred that beast, restless, fierce, and aching for release. She left the door unlocked, even if only by the smallest gesture, and somehow his beast stayed close, prowling the dark, waiting for the dawn. Ceolric watched her from the shadows, his breathing ragged with wanton restraint, battling the curse that demanded distance, even as his soul begged for closeness. In the storm's wake, under crescent moonlight that seeped through narrow windows, the slow unravelling began, an aching fissure in his cold defences, opening towards something dangerous, something utterly human. And Vara, scarred and stumbling through the darkness, dared to hope that perhaps, in this fortress of stone and curse, she might find the fragment of belonging she had lost. The night wrapped around them, both, king and outcast, curse and beast, bound by a fragile thread that neither understood yet, but neither dared to break. The cold stone corridors of the fortress whispered of solitude and ancient grievances, but in the stables beneath the great hall, a quiet warmth began to gather, almost imperceptible if one weren't paying close attention. Ceolric's beast prowled restlessly in the shadows of his mind, an ever-present presence clawing against the iron bars of the curse that bound him. Yet, beneath that savage hunger, there was something raw and unguarded drawing him in, Vara's quiet strength. It was not loud or boastful, but a steady pulse, a gentle defiance that neither his torment nor the unnatural curse could diminish. One evening, compelled by a restless tug in his bones, something primal and unyielding, Ceolric followed a faint sound drifting up the stone steps from the stables. Varied scents of hay, wet earth, and animal musk, wafted through the door left ajar, a soft chorus of whimpers mixed with the rustling of straw. Treading silently, he found her crouched low beside a small wooden stall, her amber eyes narrowed in concentration as she cradled a trembling wolf pup. The creature, no bigger than a fist, trembled beneath her careful hands, a delicate promise of life too fragile for the brutal world they both inhabited. The pup's fur was matted with dirt and blood, a jagged tear in one ear marking its close escape from cruel fate. Vara's touch was soft, but sure as she cleaned the wound, her fingers unafraid despite the creature's restless shivers. The hopelessness of his own curse, the anger and isolation that had long held him tight, loosened just enough for Ceolric to watch and listen. "He won't make it without care," she whispered, voice quiet but resolute, barely disturbing the stale air. "We just have to give him time." Ceolric's breath caught at the tenderness behind those words. Trust, the very thing his cursed skin had denied him, the very thing his beast craved, despite the iron walls he'd built around himself. He stepped closer, noting how the other wolves in the stable, the remnants of his pack, wary and watchful, had gradually fallen silent, their snarls and growls giving way to cautious observation. The presence of the alpha's human companion was clearly unsettling to them, yet even the fiercest among the wolves seemed unable to deny the unspoken promise in Vara's presence. Her fingers worked methodically, pressing clean moss against the puppy's wound, whispering soft encouragement like a litany of hope. Ceolric's icy blue eyes burned with something fierce, something painfully familiar, the instinct to protect, to preserve, to claim. "How long have you been here?" His voice was rough, raw, with suppressed hunger and haunted by the curse. She didn't startle. Instead, her gaze found his in the dim light, fierce and unwavering. "Since you found me, I couldn't leave him to die." She reached out, gently stroking the pup's fur along its spine. "This castle holds death, but I choose to bring life." The raw truth of her words stunned him into silence, the brutal fortress around his heart inching open despite the burdens of kingship and curse. His beast growled low in his throat, not with anger, but wary approval, sensing a kindred resilience that refused to cower beneath the weight of despair. Ceolric's voice lowered almost a murmur. "The pack will have to accept this if you do." Her smile was slight but steady, a hint of victory in a world stacked against her. "Then I'll earn it, one wound at a time." The days that followed held a strange kind of magic. Vara became a quiet fixture among the stables, her presence softening the sharp edges of the brutal realm Ceolric inhabited. Wolves, once aggressive and snarling, edged closer to her in cautious truce. The pup, now growing stronger, began to follow her with tentative, eager steps. Each of her gentle acts carved away the pack's grudging wariness, sewing together fragile threads of acceptance where none had existed before. All the while, Ceolric remained his brooding, silent self, yet those who watched closely could see the subtle shifts beneath the surface, an uncharacteristic stillness when Vara entered his chamber, a restrained warmth in his gaze when she was near, a furrowing of his brow. The curse still clenched tight around his skin, yet something deeper, something human and aching, stirred steadily in the space between them, but no sanctuary remains untouched by shadows. Whispers began to thread through the corridors of the castle like poisonous serpents. Lords and ladies in the court's glittering halls, muttered behind gloved hands and painted smiles, their words dripping with suspicion and contempt. Vara's presence became a thorn in the side of tradition and pride, a scandal wrapped in a scandal, an outcast who should never have been welcomed, much less trusted. They say she's no more than a witch's servant. A sharp-voiced noblewoman sneered during one gathering in the great hall. The same hands that once stained her clan's honor now defile the Alpha's court. The ebb and flow of courtly alliances shifted as venomous tongues spun tales that sought to fracture Caelric's rule. Vara heard the jabs in the hallways, the thinly veiled barbs disguised as innocent gossip. Each cruel word, each sideways glance, layered upon her heart like fresh wounds, testing her resolve. Yet she held herself upright, spine straight, and eyes unwavering, the scarred edge of her cheek catching the flicker of torchlight as she met their gaze. When a particularly cruel insult cut through the murmurs, words meant to humiliate and undo her, Vara did not falter. The room fell still, heavy as stone, as she met the speaker's gaze without a hint of apology or fear. "I am here by the king's will," Vara said quietly, voice steady and unshaken, "and I stand because I have earned that right. Not by birth, not by clan, but by my choices." The noblewoman's face flushed crimson, lips pursed in thin surprise at the unexpected defiance. Whispers rippled like wildfire, some admiring, others bitter. Caelric, seated on his lofty throne, felt the familiar claws of anger and protectiveness rise unbidden from a place he tried long to silence. His beast snarled low in response, a guttural warning reverberating through the stone walls, a fierce growl that belonged to the king and to the beast entwined within him. His gaze snapped toward Vara, fierce and unyielding. The room felt colder then, as if the air thickened with the weight of all unspoken fears. His jaw tightened, muscles tensed beneath his skin, every fiber of him yearning to rise and silence the voices that dared to belittle her, to dismiss the strength she fought to carry. For the first time in the harsh silence of his reign, Caelric's protective fury spilled out, bare, visceral, unmistakable. The beast's growl echoed beneath his words when he finally spoke, low and cutting through the muttering crowd. "She stands not by my mercy, but beside me as the strength I choose, and that is all any of you need to know." There was a tremor in his voice that betrayed the battle waging inside, the curse demanding seclusion, and the king's heart yearning to protect something, someone beyond himself. Whispers died to stunned silence, as courtiers met the unyielding defiance in Caelric's expression, a silent challenge that did not need further explanation. Vara caught his gaze then, and in the briefest of moments the walls between them shifted. In her amber eyes was a fierce gratitude, unspoken, undeniable. She knew it was not just his status protecting her, but the restless beast beneath, whose need for closeness struggled against invisible chains. Beneath that grand hall, in the quiet sanctuary of the stables, and in the dark corners of the court, something fragile and fierce was weaving into being. Not trust born of easy acceptance, but one tempered by scars, by fury, by the unyielding will to survive and claim a place no one had willingly offered. Caelric's beast still prowled, aching and restless, and though the curse remained a cruel wall, the invisible thread that bound him to Vara tightened, no longer simply a tether of torment, but the first fragile strand of a bond that might one day shatter the darkest shadows and heal the deepest wounds. In the silence after his defense, as the gathering slowly dispersed, Vara felt the weight of eyes still filled with suspicion, yet a small flicker of something new, respect. Caelric, once shadow and stone, was shifting beneath the weight of her presence, and the unexpected strength of her spirit. It was a beginning wrought not from ease or shared blood, but from defiance and unspoken understanding that she belonged here, not because they said so, but because she refused to be anything less. That night, as cold wind howled against the fortress walls, and the moon's thin crescent cast long shadows, Ceolric stood alone on the battlements, hands clenched into fists at his sides. The curse throbbed like a poison in his veins, but beneath it a stubborn ember burned bright, lit by the quiet flame Vara had sparked in the dark, a flame that dared to imagine a future where the beast was no longer a prison. The fortress might be old, and the curse might be ancient, but something new was stirring in the darkness. Something dangerous and human, as wild and fierce as the wolves who circled under the stars, ready to follow a queen who had chosen to stand unbroken in a world that demanded she fall. The nights grew longer and heavier within the fortress, thick with anticipation and unspoken tension. Ceolric remained on the edge of his own torment, a creature bound by unseen chains, and Vara, drawn inexplicably to the wildness lurking beneath his rigid silence, found herself walking a precarious tightrope between control and surrender power. It was during one of those long, frost-bitten evenings that Vara first felt it, the subtle pulse beneath her skin, a tremor in the air around her that wasn't altogether her own, but undeniably hers to command. The candlelight flickered low in the chamber they now shared, more out of necessity than choice, forced by the ever-tightening threat from rival clans, and the walls of the fortress serving less as protection and more as confinement. She sat cross-legged near the hearth, her fingers tracing restless patterns in the ash, eyes fixed on the dancing shadows cast by the flames. Ceolric stood near the window, the wide expanse of night pressing beyond the thick glass, its frame silhouetted against the star-strewn sky. Ice-blue eyes, sharp and cold as glaciers carved by millennia, scanned the darkness, every muscle taut like a drawn bow. His curse pulsed visibly beneath his skin, veins darkening, a beast barely restrained, a tempest threatening to break free. Vara shivered, but it wasn't the cold, it was the first whisper of the power waking within her. She felt an electric hum, rising ever so slightly, a surge that made the ends of her hair lift and the tiny scar along her cheek itch. It was a heat she didn't recognize, raw, primitive, elemental. A tremor of it stirred when Ceolric shifted, when his beast sighed low, deep in his throat, like two powers born of rage and desperation, dipping toward connection in the same dark night. Her breath caught suddenly, a flicker of energy rippling through the air. The ash at her fingertips sparked, lifting gently, swirling on a breath she hadn't drawn. Green-yellow embers whispered to life, circling slow and wary. She gasped, jerking back, frustration biting her tongue. Asterisk. Not now. Not here. Asterisk. Fear prickled the back of her neck. She had been taught to hide what was dangerous, to keep the beast inside locked away, powerless. But something inside her clawed against that lesson, a growing bond with Ceolric's own dark fury, the beast he so fiercely controlled. It was waking something ancient within her, a gift she had neither asked for nor understood. Her eyes flicked toward him, careful, searching. Ceolric turned, and his gaze met hers, not with the cold distance of before, but something closer, sharper, simmering with a fierce curiosity and unspoken acknowledgement. "Vara," he said, voice low but steady. "What was that?" Her heart hammered. Betraying her. "Nothing," she whispered, but the ember glow danced in the air, a silent defiance. He moved closer, slow and sure, a mountain carved from ice and shadow, narrowing the space between them. "It's never nothing with you," he said softly, but there was no accusation, only a gravity that pulled her tighter than chains. She swallowed hard, refusing to look away. "I don't want it to be a problem." Calic's hand hovered near her, trembling as if he fought against his own instinct. "You're not a problem." The struggle behind his words was fierce, his curse whispered sharp between them, a dormant tempest needing release, but restrained by their fragile trust. Hours stretched like silk pulled tight, confined to close quarters by the external threat growing beyond the walls. Their nights bled into one another, quiet exchanges, shared glances, the electric hum of their unspoken war. Neither yielded to weakness, both bound by a stubbornness too fierce to break, yet the slow burn beneath their clashing wills deepened with every heartbeat. Vara felt the pull of the beast inside Caelric, wild and raw, dangerous and magnetic, and with it the emergence of her own power, untamed but awakening with fierce urgency. She was learning control, practice in small, stolen moments, while the fortress held its breath around them, but the delicate balance shattered suddenly, as brutal and quick as a lightning strike. The attack came without warning, a savage tide of rival clans breaking through the outer defenses, claws and teeth hidden behind veils of shadow and treachery. The fortress roared to life in chaos and fury, steel ringing against steel, cries echoing like wild banshees under the moon's pale eye. Caelric's first instinct was war, but the beast within him snarled with pain and fury, the curse flaring sharp, threatening to undo him. He looked to Vara, then his eyes raw and blazing. "We leave now!" There was no hesitation. They moved together like two halves of a fierce whole, hearts pounding in wild sync. The corridors twisted and turned, the stone walls shaking beneath the thunder of battle. Vara's breath came ragged, but she kept pace, limbs burning and senses sharpened to razor edges. Then the final breach forced them out into the wilderness, dark, cold, and endless beneath the bruised sky. Caelric's hand found hers in the dark, fingers locking with a grip not of command, but of desperate need. "Stay close," he breathed. His voice broke the night like a promise forged in fire. The wild was merciless. The air carried the scent of blood and smoke, the cry of distant foes promising death with every rustle. They hadn't just fled the enemy, they had fled the known, stepping into the rawness of the world beyond stone and shadow. Vara's muscles screamed with exhaustion, but her mind reached deeper, skimming the edge of her newfound powers. When a root snagged her foot, Caelric's arm caught her, his touch steady and, for the first time, unblinking. His curse, the barrier that had once turned every touch into agony, flickered and softened beneath the moonlight. His beast acknowledged her, not as threat or pain, but as something vital and unbreakable. The sensation left her breathless, a shiver rippling along her spine. She looked up, meeting those intense eyes filled with raw, unguarded truth. "You're here," Caelric said, voice low, almost reverent, "and nothing hurts any more." It was a confession wrung from the depths of his torment, a fragile truce between beast and woman. The wilderness folded around them, holding its breath as the walls within both of them began to crumble. From the shadows, their enemies' roars drew closer, a reminder that survival demanded allies, not walls. But each step they took into the night bound them tighter, not just by necessity, but by something slower, more dangerous. The courage Vara showed, facing the wild unknown and the fierce hunt of clans bent on their ruin, kindled a spark in Caelric's guarded heart. In a moment stolen from the chaos, he lowered his hand to brush a stray strand of hair from her face, fingers trembling with something he dared not name. "Vara," he whispered, the weight of his name like a vow on his lips. "Whatever comes next, you're not alone." She met his gaze without flinching. Fire blazing alive behind her amber eyes. "Neither are you." The night wrapped around them like a cloak, the stars blinking witness to a bond reforged in the rawness of survival and the slow bloom of trust. The hunt was far from over. The world was brutal and dark, and the curse was ancient and cruel, but within the wild heart of the wilderness, beneath moon and blood and quiet fierce defiance, two souls tethered by pain and power dared to share a fragile, fierce hope. The beast in Caelric stayed close that night, not as a prison, but as a guard, and the woman beside him, scarred, yet unbroken, whispered to her own awakening power a silent promise: whatever storms awaited, they would face them together. Back within the cold stone walls of the fortress walls that had witnessed centuries of power and betrayal, the weight of silence pressed heavily between Vara and Caelric. The echoes of the night's wild hunt still throbbed in their veins, but a new storm brewed beneath the surface, one far more insidious than their roaming enemies. It began as a whisper, a shadow threaded into the corridors of Caelric's keep, twisting around, flickering torches and murmurs behind closed doors. Vara's amber eyes, steady and sharp as ever, scanned the parchments unrolled before her on the heavy oak table, faint moonlight spilling through narrow windows to illuminate written words she had never expected to see, forged names, twisted claims, and a web of deception that clawed deep into her own fractured past. Each name threaded with intent to topple the Alpha King, not through open battle, but through poison, lies, and the viper's bite of trust betrayed. She never was who she claimed to be. A voice hissed behind the sigils on the parchment. The exile from the eastern clans, the scapegoater story was crafted, a flawless lie to serve as bait. Vara is not just a pawn. She is the key to breaking Caelric's curse. Vara's breath hitched, the scar along her cheek burning as the truth erupted like acid inside her. The story she had told herself about betrayal by her own kin began to fracture. She had not been abandoned, she had been sent, used, a tool in a larger game she was only now seeing clearly. A game meant to shatter Caelric's hold over his land by cutting the fragile threads of his trust. Caelric's presence was sudden and irrevocable at her side, his ice-blue eyes, hard, like blades yet shadowed with the weight of disbelief and something closer to hurt. "They lie through their teeth," he growled low, voice like gravel rubbing against stone. "Used us," his hand flexed in a fist, nails digging white marks into his palm. For a heartbeat the fortress seemed to hold its breath. The quiet was no longer peace. It was the silence before a war of whispers. "I may have been sent here," Vara admitted, voice tight but unyielding. "But I will not be the weapon they wield against you." "Not anymore." Her words struck Caelric in the chest like a thrown spear. There was raw defiance in every syllable, a refusal to revert to victimhood, a declaration that she would claim agency in a game meant to control her. And in that defiance, something fragile and powerful kindled. The betrayal stung deeper than any wound, a betrayal not just from an enemy across battle lines, but from the very people they trusted to guard their legacies. A conspiracy designed to twist the Alpha King's curse into a shackle, not just of flesh, but of fate and soul. Night deepened, shadows pooling thick against cold stone. Those who once whispered secrets sought to straighten their lies, while Vara traced the contours of the conspiracy, piecing together the cruel architecture that had tried to bind them both. Every revelation laid bare new fault lines in the fortress itself, between allies, between heartbeats. But she refused to shrink away, refused to let the web tighten. "If they want war," Vara said, voice cold with determination, "I will meet them in the field they've chosen, the mind and the spirit. Caelric's gaze softened, then a fleeting grace in his rigid posture. And what of the curse? The bond that keeps us chained? Will this upheaval break you both? She turned to him, amber fire, blazing, unyielding. It will break them before it breaks us. In those quiet moments before dawn, the fortress no longer felt like a prison. It hummed with a new energy, born of shared struggle and an unspoken promise. Vara would face the poison masked as truth, unravel the threads meant to cage them, and Caelric himself. Late into the night, as others sought refuge in sleep, Caelric stood close, watching Vara move through the fortress rooms with the grace of a shadow and the certainty of a storm. The Alpha King's curse, that ancient barrier that had once frozen him in silent isolation, felt less like a wall now, and more like a fragile glass partition, thin and fragile, but capable of shattering under pressure. He could feel it, the subtle weakening, the softening of the beast that roared beneath his skin, and in the dimness of a chamber cloaked in secrecy, away from prying eyes, Caelric let his guard falter. He reached out, not in war or command, but in tentative reach for something far deeper. His fingers brushed against Vara's wrist, the ghost of a touch light, but electrifying, as if testing the fragile line between curse and cure. "Don't pull away," he breathed, voice rough with vulnerability, a mirror to the loneliness etched beneath his stoic mask. "To trust you." Vara's heart clenched, a fragile pulse that rippled warmth across her skin where his touch lingered. She had seen the frozen king, the beast walled in pain and fury. But here was the man beneath, the man who had lived too long behind iron and shadow, who hungered in silence for connection. "I'm here," she replied softly, eyes shimmering with the fierce light of one who refuses to flee from the darkness. "You don't have to face it alone." Slowly, their fingers intertwined. Of barriers cracking under the weight of shared scars, Caelric's ice-blue eyes flickered with emotion, something unspoken but palpable, fierce protectiveness mixed with gratitude that nearly broke the stoicism that had once defined him. In that quiet closeness, the beast stayed still, not a cage, but a guardian, a presence wary yet loyal. The curse that had bound Caelric was no longer a chain, but a thread woven through vulnerability. Each tentative touch was a step toward breaking the cycle of loneliness, a reaching out from the abyss toward dawn. They lingered in that fragile space, breath mingling, hearts beating against the silence. Caelric let himself imagine a future beyond curse and pain, not just a king cloaked in darkness, but a man capable of warmth, of quiet moments stolen from the relentless demands of power. "You awakened something in me," he confessed, voice rough with the revelation of his guarded soul. "Something I thought was lost long ago. The need to be more than a legend forged in fear." Vara smiled. Then scar and all, radiant blaze of defiance and hope, wrapped in the night's soft embrace. "Then let us be the storm that others fear but cannot break." Their closeness was a silent promise, tying an unspoken vow, sealed by touches that spoke louder than words. The fortress, once a sanctuary of cold distrust, now held the fragile pulse of two souls learning to trust in the impossible, healing beneath the weight of curse and conspiracy, fiercely connected beneath a sky heavy with stars. Outside, the world remained cruel and wild, and the hunt was far from over. But inside, the walls echoed not just with footfalls or whispered deceit, but with the steady rhythm of something new, the slow, fierce bloom of trust and power intertwined. The Alpha King had not lost his throne. He had found a queen, not just by his side, but within his guarded heart. Together, they faced the coming storm, unbroken, unbowed. Whatever came next, they would stand, and they would fight, not as king in exile, but as two halves of a whole too strong to be shattered by lies or curse. A fragile hope, yes, but hope nonetheless. And sometimes, in the deepest darkness, hope was the greatest weapon of all. The air inside the fortress thickened, tense as steel wires pulled taut, threatening to snap under the weight of truth. Ceolric's steps were heavy, his usual unshakable posture fractured beneath the storm gathering within him. His gaze, sharp and unforgiving, found the man who until then had been woven into the fortress's very foundation, Jorin, his closest adviser, the one whose counsel had steered kingdoms and battles alike. But now the glowing ember of trust turned to ash. "You," Ceolric said, voice low, cracked with betrayal and a fury that did not mask the deep, raw wound beneath. "You orchestrated her exile. You poisoned the heart of my pack. You," Jorin's lips twisted into a cold sneer, unmasked and unapologetic. "It was necessary," he whispered, venom coiling in each syllable. "You and your cursed queen, Ceolric, you were too weak to see what had to be done. Vara disrupts the balance. Her very existence threatens to topple everything I've worked to preserve." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the truth, so long hidden under layers of lies, whispers, and shadows, unfolded like a cruel tale told in fragments at midnight. Ceolric's mind reeled. The revelation, a serpent's fang piercing deep, not just a blow to his leadership, but a fracture to the fragile new bond, forged only days before. "Tell me then," Ceolric's voice, though shaken, gathered sharp edges once more. "Why imprison me behind this barrier of flesh and pain, away from touch and solace, if not to sow fear and isolation? You brewed this torment yourself." Jorin's eyes glinted with ice-cold triumph. "It was protection, a safeguard, but even that old magic depends on control. And you, with your weakness for that outcast, threatened to unravel everything." The room held its breath, the revelation settling bitter and undeniable. Vara stood silently beside Ceolric, eyes like blazing amber, every muscle taut. The weight of accusation pressed upon her. She had been exiled on Jorin's word, branded a traitor, her loyalty questioned. The pack had doubted her, whispered behind closed doors, their murmurs thick with suspicion and spite. Now, more than ever, she felt the sting of isolation, but equally fierce was the flame of defiance burning anew. Ceolric's hand found hers, fingers curling protectively, fiercely. His ice-blue eyes bore into hers, fierce and unyielding. "You've heard the truth from the mouth of the traitor," he said, voice steady despite the churning storm inside. "But I've seen the truth in her eyes, felt it in her quiet strength." The pack's suspicion, "It's the poison he spread, not the truth." Vara's breath trembled, but did not waver. "I never betrayed you, Ceolric," she said, voice steadying with the fierce conviction of survival and hope. "I stood alone against their hatred and lies." "I would do so again, not for the crown, but for the man who holds my soul." The tension remained raw, but this moment, this fragile stand against betrayal, was the fulcrum upon which their future would balance. Ceolric's beast, silent and watching beneath the surface of his control, stirred restlessly, sensing the dark currents of treachery that could break or bind them. They faced the enemy, not just outside their fortress walls, but the one lurking within, the venom of betrayal and doubt. The greatest trials of loyalty are those wrought with the sharpest pain, and together they would endure the blaze. In the long hours after the truth shattered trust, Ceolric and Vara delved into forgotten scrolls and whispered legends hidden beneath stone vaults. The curse, the cruel shackle that barred Ceolric from touch, from love, was no punishment,